Hey, Stacy from Lubbock. That's the West Texas. That's where I'm originally from. So glad you're here. And Matt from Arlington via North Carolina. You must be on spring break or something. Hey, there's somebody from Coeur d'Alene. Man, Coeur d'Alene. I used to live about 30 minutes from there. I lived in Clarkston, Washington. That's a great place to be. So lots of good folks. Pasco, we've done tons in the Tri-Cities area, and so good to have everyone. Cecilia from Bloomington will be in Bloomington the end of next month for a council retreat. And welcome everybody. We're glad you're here. I want to introduce Krisa de la Cruz, who is the uh, Director of Business Development for SGR, and our good friend Randy Mayeux. And Krisa, Randy's going to be doing a book briefing on The Right Kind of Wrong by Amy Edmondson. I don't know if you've had a chance to hear this presentation or not, Krisa, but you and I have a fond affection for Randy's book briefings. If this is somebody's first time to listen, what would you say they ought to be thinking about right now?
Oh, I would say just be listening, just try to listen and take notes when Randy says to. Follow the handouts, which I just put in the chat, because he'll go through those with us. And get ready for your brain to be stretched a little bit because Randy has a way of doing that. And I'll say, Mike, I thought you were going to make a joke about how you and I were no stranger to the right kind of wrong.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm the wrong. That's what you were going to say, right? That's often been the case. Yeah. So I want to reiterate it's really important to download that handout. Randy may say a little bit more about that and to have it out so that you can follow it. You can follow it on your screen, or you can also, if you wish, you can print it. And so, Randy, welcome. We are so appreciative of you being here today, and want to throw the floor to you. I know you love this book too. You and I have talked about it several times. So, without further delay, let's kick it over to you and have you start talking to us about The Right Kind of Wrong.
Okay, Mike and Krisa and all the participants, thank you and welcome to this month's webinar. I do a couple of things at the beginning. I'm taking my headphones off. I can only see the panelists, but Mike and Krisa, wave if you can hear me okay. Okay, so the sound is good. And I do strongly encourage you, if you have not printed this out, if you are near a printer, go ahead and hit print. And I'll begin in just a second. I have to make one more adjustment I forgot to make, and then I'll be ready. And I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about this book. And it's important to understand this about the book before I get into the actual presentation. Way back years ago, a couple of decades ago, the Financial Times started giving an annual Business Book of the Year award. There have been some great winners of that award. It's got a large tens of thousands of dollars cash prize. They start with a long list of 15 to 17 books. They reduce it to a short list of 5 to 6, and then they choose the Business Book of the Year. The first book they ever chose for that was The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. One of the great books that I've read that won that was Chip War. And there have just been some great books that I have read. I've read many of the business books of the year. In fact, at my event in Dallas, the first Friday book synopsis, of the 6 shortlisted books last year, I presented 4 of them. That builds to this point, Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well by Amy Edmondson was the Financial Times Business Book of the Year of 2023. That speaks to its import and its significance. Now, I've got to start with what is on the front page of today's Dallas Morning News. On the front page, above the fold on the right, is that the airlines are getting after Boeing. They are telling Boeing, you have got to fix your culture and build a better airline because we are relying on you. Well, it turns out that not the current problems of Boeing, but the problems from a couple of years back with the crashes of the two 737s is mentioned in this book. And so this idea of, and if you do not have this phrase in your head clearly, you've got some white space right here. Write down this phrase, psychological safety. Psychological safety. It's a new term for an old problem with a lot of research done by Amy Edmondson. She teaches at Harvard. She coined the term psychological safety. Her earlier book, which I have presented, called The Fearless Organization, is a book about psychological safety. And this book is the next version with a lot of new research on you need psychological safety. Now, I don't want to jump around too much. I'll drive you crazy. But if you want to jump all the way to page 9 for just a second, page 9 at the top of the page. Teams have to have psychological safety to learn well from their mistakes. And so, first of all, this is a book about teams functioning well. Second, it is a book about mistakes. And I know that none of you on this Zoom event today have ever made a mistake, but in the possibility of you someday making a mistake, the question is, will you learn to learn from your mistakes? And that's what this book is really all about. And so at the top of page 9 in bold, I have the definition from her earlier book, The Fearless Organization. Psychological safety is broadly defined as a climate in which people are comfortable expressing and being themselves. Now, what that is an academic sentence that means this. If you're in a room of people and you have something to say, and it would be useful to that team for you to say it, you need the freedom to say it. If you don't have the freedom to say it, you won't say it, and the team will be less effective. And so if the team somehow, stops conversation, they do this in a lot of ways. Some leaders don't want to be bothered. They just want to be in charge and make the decisions. That's a bad mistake. Some people, leaders and team members, have become very good at, and you can pick your term, ridicule, put downs, mockery, criticism that is unfounded before they even listen, or simply the act of not listening, so that they train the people to keep their mouth shut because they don't want to be mocked or ridiculed or just put down in a terrible way. And so if you don't have the freedom to say, I think we need to look at this, without somebody saying, you idiot, we don't want to do that, then you don't have psychological safety. And when that happens, when you make a mistake, you will not learn from your mistake. And that's what's happened at Boeing. People were quiet. There were internal emails that said, I wouldn't fly on Boeing. Would you fly on Boeing? From people within the company. I mean, imagine that. So that's kind of the quick punch of what this book is describing. And it is an international business and organizational problem. Now turn to the front page, and we're going to walk you through. I should have said this a moment ago. It is 11:10 right now, Central Time. I will end this presentation, my part of it, at 11:35. Mike Mowery will then come on and lead some facilitation, and he's going to be the one who is going to respond to questions. I'll be on to do that, and you can put questions in the chat, and so we'll do that at about 11:35. All right, on the front page. What is the point of this book? We want to keep from making mistakes, from failing, sort of. And when we do make mistakes, when we fail, we want to learn. Failing well is a modern day survival skill. That's worth circling. Failing well is a modern day survival skill. Now, if you're confused already by we want to keep from making mistakes, sort of. If we know that there are bolts that should be put on the door to keep the door on the airplane, we don't want to make any mistakes. But if we are trying to find out an answer to something, if we're experimenting and innovating and using inventiveness and trying something new, if we don't yet know what works, we want to make the mistakes that need to be made as rapidly as possible so that we know, oh, that one doesn't work. Now we'll try this one. Elon Musk, in the book Walter Isaacson wrote it called Elon Musk, he is a champion of this. He sends up spaceships that he expects to explode because he figures by the fourth launch, they'll have figured out what the problems are. There are many other companies and stories like that where people intend to fail fast so they learn what does not work. Why is this book worth our time? 3 reasons that I give. Number 1, this book is a tutorial on the value of psychological safety. Number 2, this book is a history lesson about valuable mistakes made throughout the years, and some not so valuable, but simply catastrophic. And number 3, this book presents a game plan to help us learn how to learn from our mistakes. Amy Edmondson is not just an academician, not just a researcher. She was once the lead engineer for Buckminster Fuller. So she has experience of how to find out what works and what does not work. And so that's a really interesting piece of her background. If you'll turn to page 2, what we now have are the best of Randy's highlighted passages. I read my books on my Kindle app on my iPad. It allows me to copy and paste all of the highlights I get, and then I go through that very long list, and I reduce it to the few pages I include in my handouts. When you see one in bold, that's my emphasis. When you see one in larger font, that's my emphasis. And so I encourage you to read this handout fully on your own later. And if you don't have time to read it all, then at least read the bold and large font highlights. I'm going to read just a few of these. You're going to move fast. Page 2, number 4. The idea that people and organizations should learn from failure is popular and even seems obvious. But most of us fail to learn the valuable lessons failures can offer. Yes, we do. Number 11, trial and error is a common term for the kind of experimentation needed in these settings, but it's a misnomer. Error implies that there was a right way to do it in the first place. Intelligent failures, where you learn what works and does not work, intelligent failures are not errors. Page 3. Number 16. When a group is higher in psychological safety, it's likely to be more innovative, do higher quality work, and enjoy better performance compared to a group that is low in psychological safety. Put a star beside number 16. You want a successful team in your city. You want a successful group in your organization. You've got to have psychological safety. Number 20, catching small problems before they spiral out of control to cause a more substantial, complex failure becomes a crucial capability in the modern world. Yes, it does. Number 21, our human capacity for sustained circle each of these: self-reflection, humility, honesty, and curiosity. Self-reflection, humility, honesty, and curiosity propels us to seek out patterns that provide insight into our behavior. If you think about that, self-reflection is good. The failure to be able to do that is bad. Humility is good. Arrogance is deadly to psychological safety and group function. Arrogance is bad. Honesty is good. Curiosity is absolutely necessary. Number 23, unfortunately, I love this kind of phrase, and this is a good one. Unfortunately, most warning systems do not warn us that they can no longer warn us. That's from Charles Thoreau. Okay, turn to page 4. I've already got to move more quickly. Number 30. The silver lining in every perfect storm is this: each complex failure contains multiple opportunities for prevention. If there is a truth that we now know, we have to get good at anticipating what could go wrong. We have to get good at saying, this could go wrong, and then get ready to solve that dilemma when it does go wrong. In the book, The Black Swan by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, he says that you get ready for everything that can go wrong that you can think of, but there will come another wrong thing that you could not predict. That's the black swan. Number 38, a kind of automatic sense that we're right blinds us. The confirmation bias again. We literally fail to see disconfirming evidence. We have willful blindness, as a book by Margaret Heffernan said years ago. All right, turn to page 5. Number 46, many live not so much lives of quiet desperation, but of quiet shame. That's from Brene Brown. And here is kind of why this is important in this book. It's why it's important. In a mistake, if somebody jumps on a person and shames them, you've defeated any future possibility of psychological safety. You attack the problem. You say, here's the problem, but you don't put shame on a person who may have made a mistake that they couldn't see anyway. So it's a really delicate balance. Okay, number 53, our lives are full of simple, complex, and if we're trying hard enough, intelligent failures. A relationship between context and failure type is easy to see. Novel contexts are home to intelligent failures. Consistent contexts spawn basic failures. And variable contexts are conducive to complex failures. True, but incomplete. And then turn to page 6. At the very top, I'm not going to read it. It's in the bold. It's the story from Toyota, but it is their capability of putting psychological safety into practice, where anybody who sees a problem on the assembly line can stop the assembly line, that's called the andon cord, and fix the problem. And so you've got to say, what didn't go well so we can make it better. This is almost the growth mindset implicit in his words from Carol Dweck's seminal research, that you've got to have a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. And number 62, elite failure practitioners. Around the world and throughout history, athletes, inventors, entrepreneurs, scientists have taught me a great deal about the unique combination of, here's that word again, curiosity, rationality, honesty, determination, and passion that failing well requires. Now, the book doesn't deal with this, but let me just step aside briefly and comment about curiosity. If all you do is what you already do, if all you read is what you already know about, if you do not pursue stuff you've never considered, if you do not read from arenas that are outside of your arena, then you're going to have a pretty narrow worldview. You're not curious enough. One of the best business books I've read in the last decade is called Range by David Epstein. And he says, you want to be as broad-based knowledge as possible. I really like that. And this book compliments and praises the value of curiosity. All right, page 7 is the most important excerpts, what I call the thesis quotes. It would be great if an author said, here's my thesis for this book. They usually don't. But I read the book carefully, every word, and I try to find what is this book about. And these are the quotes that I think capture that. I'll read a few of these. And yes, I have a terrible, embarrassing typo. It's a mistake that has 2 of the quotes on repeated. So apologize for that. Top of the page. It's impossible to calculate the wasted time and resources created by our failure to learn from failure. Put a star beside that. When we don't learn from failure, we repeat the failure, and then we're just wasting time. So this book is about what makes learning from failure so difficult to put into practice. It's about how we can do better. The drop down 2, the one that's repeated. Next, I define errors, synonymous with mistakes, as unintended deviations from pre-specified standards, such as procedures, rules, or policy. Putting the cereal in the refrigerator and the milk in the cupboard is an error. A surgeon who operates on a patient's left knee when the right knee was injured has made an error. The important thing about errors and mistakes is that they are unintended. Look at the bold quote below it. To put its wisdom simply, one can say that the fundamental human challenge is this: it's hard to learn if you already know. Circle that phrase. It's hard to learn if you already know. And then below that, today my answer is this: choose learning over knowing. Quick aside. For the last few years, Apple has been the most valuable company in terms of overall value. Microsoft has now passed Apple, and they are $400 billion ahead of Apple as of this morning. Holy mackerel. Well, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, is absolutely being credited with the turnaround, and he has a famous phrase. This is worth writing down. Satya Nadella, CEO Microsoft. Don't be a know-it-all. Be a learn-it-all. I love that phrase. Choose learning over knowing. Okay, turn to page 8. And now we get into many of the points and premises of the book. At the top, I talk about Amy Edmondson. I've already talked about, she's at Harvard. And here's an observation. She quotes from multiple books in this book. And so it is helpful to read widely. This book is another example of that. She refers to many books like Think Again by Adam Grant, a very good book, and Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, the best and most important book I've ever read. And so, but the point is that Amy Edmondson is a book reader. And I'm a fan of that idea. Now, she has a lot of stories. Here's one. Pilots have the advantage of training and making mistakes without causing problems because they train in a simulator. By the way, my younger brother is a retired Air Force colonel and trains pilots on a simulator at American Airlines. So they can train on a simulator. And Amy Edmondson had this theory that people who fly airplanes who are fatigued are more dangerous than rested pilots. There's some research that backs that up. But then she got curious, and you have to listen to this. They did some tests where pilots who were well rested were flying in the simulator with a first officer, so a team of two, that they did not know each other. This was the first time they flew together. And then they had fatigued pilots who had not gotten as much sleep, but who had flown together multiple times. And what they discovered was that if you are well rested but had not flown together, you are more dangerous than not as well rested but had flown together. That's quite a finding. That tells you that the team is more critical than the fatigue factor. And so you'll look here on this point. And by the way, in this part of the handout, anything in italics comes from the book. Foshi discovered that the teams who just logged several days flying together performed better than the well-rested teams. Well, she had a similar finding. She posited, she had a hypothesis that the nurses, I'm going to say this wrong, so let me read this bold quote. Maybe the good teams, I suddenly thought, don't make more mistakes. Maybe they report more. This insight eventually led me to the discovery of psychological safety and why it matters in today's world. The more people believed that making a mistake would not be held against them, the higher the detected errors in their unit. And so what she discovered was in a hospital, a team of nurses that did not report many mistakes. The assumption was, oh, they weren't making many mistakes. But the fact is, they were afraid to report the mistakes. They would be criticized, ridiculed, mocked. Whereas the teams that reported more mistakes were actually safer because they were correcting the mistakes. Well, look at the Rust film shooting. This is another story that's in the news right now. There were missed signals. A week earlier, I did not know this until I read this book, there had been an accidental discharge that occurred twice without leading to increased scrutiny of safety practices on the film set. And that meant a human life was lost by the failure to learn from that mistake. And then she has the Boeing 737 MAX crashes. Look at the third bullet point. In a classic description of what it's like to work in an organization with low psychological safety, an engineer wrote, there is a suppressive cultural attitude towards criticism of corporate policy, especially if that criticism comes as a result of fatal accidents. They did not admit their mistakes and then fix it. And so just a little above that, it says, this is a person who works at Boeing. Would you put your family on a MAX? I wouldn't. And then the Toyota Andon cord, where any worker on the assembly line can pull the cord and stop the assembly line because that worker has spotted a mistake. And in the old General Motors ways, before Toyota hit the United States big, they would not let anybody stop the line because it was too costly to stop and restart the line. Toyota made the assumption that it would ultimately be too costly to not stop the line and fix the mistake. All right, now I'm going to just fly through these bullet point lessons in the book. Learn to practice the art of reflecting on your own mistakes and errors. We put off the hard work of reflecting on what we did wrong. Yeah, we do. Not all failures are created equal. I believe that part of successfully navigating failure to reap its rewards, and importantly, to avoid the wrong kinds of failure, starts with understanding that not all failures are created equal. Bottom of this page, we're on page 8. Learn from intelligent failures. Intelligent failures are also frequent and essential in company innovation projects. Successful innovation is only possible as a result of insights from incremental losses along the way. I've got a theory. This is Randy Mayeux's theory. You know that the real innovation seems to come from new companies. What happens is the longer a company or an organization is in existence, the more established their rituals and rules and procedures are, and the more settled they become. So they don't try new things at the same level. So there's that. All right, top of page 9, I've already talked about psychological safety. Next bullet point, we will fail. Yes, you will fail, and so will I. And so we need good failures. And the 3 failure archetypes are intelligent, basic, and complex. Complex failures are the real monsters that loom large in our work lives, organizations, and societies. They often have not one, but multiple causes, and often include a pinch of bad luck too. And so complex failures, they're trying to figure out how the bolts were missing on that Boeing plane. Was it the Boeing plant's fault? Was it the airline's fault? They're still working on that. All right, drop down. 3 traits to develop: self-awareness, situation awareness, and system awareness. What am I doing wrong? What's the situation causing to go wrong? How have our systems created the lack of psychological safety? Failing well is hard for 3 reasons: aversion, confusion, and fear. And what it really boils down to is we are afraid of the response of the people on our team when we fail. Mockery, ridicule, rejection. What makes a failure qualify as intelligent? It takes place in new territory. It presents a credible opportunity to advance toward a desired goal. It is informed by available knowledge. And finally, the failure is as small as it can be to still provide valuable insights. You don't want to crash the airplane. You want to crash the airplane in a simulator when nobody is actually hurt. And systems matter. Turn to page 10. I'm going to have to let you read all of this on your own. We're nearly out of time. But notice especially shame versus guilt in the middle of the page, and at the bottom of the page, fail, be wrong on purpose. This is the path to breakthrough innovation. And there's the famous story of the Post-it notes that were really kind of an accident, and there was failure until it worked. All right, turn to page 11. Top of the page, some small steps. Learn to pivot. Learn to apologize well. Circle that. Put a star beside it. We are bad at apologizing. I'm going to be blunt. Men are worse at apologizing than women, the research says. Learn to examine your failures and your team's failures in order to learn from them. And I'll let you read the rest of these on your own. At the bottom of the page, I've got 5 lessons and takeaways. Number 1, you will make mistakes and you will fail. Don't be shocked that you can fail. Number 2, you will work with others who make mistakes. Don't be shocked when your fellow team members make mistakes. Number 3, unless you get intentional about it, you will hide from your mistakes and thus not learn from them as you could, because the average team does not put in place good psychological safety. So there's too much ridicule, too much mockery. Number 4, it would help to develop and practice psychological safety to make it possible to learn from your mistakes. And number 5, there is no true breakthrough innovation in any arena without making mistakes and learning from your mistakes. Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well by Amy Edmondson. I hope you found this useful. I'm turning it over to Mike Mowery.
Hey, thank you, Randy. Great presentation. And I just cannot say enough about this book and about how helpful I think it is. We've got a couple of questions that have come up, and I'd like you and Krisa, and maybe I can weigh in too to help answer them. So one of them is, can you talk a little bit more about these items of self-awareness, situation awareness, system awareness? Can you expound a little bit more on what those are?
Okay. I've just finished reading an older book called It's Your Ship, on the best damn ship in the Navy. I'm presenting this for the city of Denton this week. And so one of the things that book says is that the system of command and control almost makes it systemically impossible for a higher ranking officer to even listen to a low ranking enlisted person. Mm-hmm. And the book says the real breakthrough comes from the people who's doing the work. And so the captain of the ship who wrote the book talked about how he would intentionally walk all around the ship, talk to the people. It's the old Tom Peters, Bob Waterman management by wandering around just to listen. He would spend one night a week eating with the enlisted folks. And when a VIP would come on board, he would take the VIP and they would eat not in the officers' private quarters, but in the enlisted people's quarters. And so all of that has to do with raising the self-awareness of the officers that they're out of touch with the people. And if you're not self-aware of how distant you are and how poor a listener you are, then you will not make the breakthrough responses that you need. So that's the self-awareness. Now, let's see. Situation awareness is, you got to pay attention to what the current situation is. I have lived through one hurricane. I have felt a strong earthquake, and I have experienced thousands of dollars of damage to our house that I'm sitting in right now in my home office from a tornado. Take Maslow's hierarchy. And when you have a physiological threat, you don't worry at that moment about your self-esteem. You pay attention to the situation. What is happening now? And so you've always got to be attentive to the situation. And in the book, because it's on my mind, It's Your Ship, one of the things that person says is that the people doing the work, this is the Boeing problem that she writes about, people doing the work know the deficiencies. And so they are situationally aware, and the people above them are not. And then on the system awareness, here's the bottom line. We create systems that squelch people, that silence people, or that create problems. So we've got to become, the very famous Peter, was it Peter Drucker or Edward Deming? Sorry, I'm forgetting the source of this quote, but one of them says all problems are systems problems. So those are my answers, Mike.
That's really good. And I think pushing decisions down to the place where information is, that's one of the top things that this book teaches me is the farther I am removed from where the real action is, the less I really know about it, even though I think I do. And we have to listen to the people that are really on the front line. Now, this is a tough issue for us in local government because we don't get rewarded for doing things wrong. So let's kind of dive into this other question before we wrap up, which is, where does an organization start if it doesn't already have psychological safety? What would you say to that, Randy?
Okay, you see me smiling. That's the perfect question. It's as though I tossed it to you.
Well, it didn't come from me. It came from one of
Yeah,
us.
I know it didn't. I'm just saying it's a perfect question. Okay, everybody get mad. You're welcome to get mad at me. We're lazy students. We are lazy students. We don't study. And I think the value of the executive book briefings, I do. It would, of course, be better if you read Right Kind of Wrong on your own. But this is a pretty good deep dive into the key elements of this book. You've heard of leaders who say, let's have a book club and everybody read a book together. And you know what happens. The first one of those, the people kind of read the book. By the third one of those, they hope nobody asks them a question. I think you need to bring in someone like me to say, we're going to study two careful books. By the way, research says that when you have a new arena of learning, one book will not teach you enough. You really need about 4 or 5 books to begin to get the very vocabulary and thought processes of the arena. But I think you ought to bring me in and let me do 2 books on psychological safety, this one and her first one. And then there are 3 or 4 others that mention it dramatically until it becomes part of the vocabulary and thought processes. You can't get there with one TED Talk.
Yeah.
You got to do something deeper. So that's my answer to that question.
That's a great answer. And I would say, I think you've got to begin with the group that you lead. And if you lead a group, lead that group with the psychological safety, make sure they know it's okay to make mistakes, give them the right kind of parameters and boundaries so that they're not off in an area you don't want them to be. Give them safety, and within those boundaries, let them do it, and be the one that has their back. So, and as Randy said, yes, we can, if you are interested, certainly set up having Randy come in person and do a book briefing, or we do many of them just like this. They're on Zoom, and we give Randy a little more time when, besides the webinars. The webinars, we shorten it up, but when he is, contracted with the city to do it, usually those are about 1-hour presentations, and then we follow it up with some great discussion. Before we close out, Krisa, any big takeaways you had from this that you want to share?
I will be honest, Mike, I've told this story a million times, but this presentation especially just reminded me of it. But when I started with SGR and I was submitting an RFP for some work, Randy, you've probably heard me tell this story too. And I mean, I was brand new and I was working on it. And I finally finished it and went to submit it and realized I was a day late. I missed the submission window and I was devastated and left the office that day. This was on a Friday afternoon. Left the office and called Ron on my way home on his cell phone and said, Ron, I made a big mistake today. I really messed up. And he started laughing. And I said, no, Ron, please don't laugh. I'm being serious. I really messed up bad. I messed up on something. You asked me to do this and I messed it up. And he laughed again and he said, okay, okay, what'd you do? And I told him, and he said, oh, goodness, Krisa, it's after 5 o'clock on a Friday. If that's the biggest mistake you made this week, we are doing just fine. Go enjoy your family. And I will never forget that because he gave me a lot of grace in that moment and gave me the permission to fail sometimes. And he knew I would not miss another deadline. He knew I was taking it seriously, but it created that sense of psychological safety, And so I think about that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's we've all probably got a story like that from Ron as our CEO and leader that I have. I could tell more than one actually. And then that's really important. When something like that goes wrong, that's a really crucial moment, how you react as a leader, for sure. So, well, we did record this. It'll be available on our YouTube channel. We want to encourage you to share the handout with other people in your organization. And we do these once a month on these webinars with Randy. And we'll be back next month with another great book. And Randy, just can't thank you enough. Tremendous job. There's a great book, and you did a great job in presenting it. Thank you to everyone who's been a part of being here for this one. Thank you, Krisa, for all of your leadership. Hope you have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week. Anything we can do at SGR to help you be more successful, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.